Went missing 3 days before Deborah did. One right after the other after the other. Those were all found strewn about her, hanging in trees. Oh, this is all, man, this is a mess. Hey weirdos, welcome back, or if you're new to my channel, thanks for stopping by. My name's Tracy, I am the Bone Knacker, and today, as promised, although very late, is the second part of the New Bedford highway murders. I do just want to remind people that at the time of recording this, I have not yet read like shallow graves and stuff. I didn't want this video to be on somebody's already published research. I wanted to do my own research and come to the conclusions and opinions that I could come to based on my own research, and that is what this is. Now that all that boring stuff's out of the way, grab yourself a snack, put on your outside feet, because we are going back to New Bedford, Massachusetts. And from here on out, it's going to get like extra confusing because we're going to have two active timelines. We have the one that we started in the first video in Massachusetts with the 9 missing women. But as we all know, where we last left off, Ken has closed down shop and has moved to Florida. So timeline is going to begin for him down there as well. But Ken, being a sack of shit, stayed a sack of shit. He changed locations, not personalities. We saw each other, it was September, October. 9 women had gone missing, but 2 bodies had been found. So there are still 7 missing women in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Kenneth Pont has closed his law firm now and has moved to Fort Port, Florida, into a duplex with a woman named Diane Dougherty. Most of the things I read said that Pont actually arrived in Florida in October. So by November, this Diane has already gone to the police in Florida and pressed charges against Ken Pont for assault with a firearm, and false imprisonment, which is basically holding her against her will. If you remember from the first part of this, that was something that was said about Ken back in Massachusetts. A lot of these Weld Square women who were running drugs to him often complained that they were uncomfortable with the fact that he would have them come inside and then lock the doors and the windows and hold them captive there for hours and hours and hours. Back in Massachusetts, November 8th, a 3rd body is found.
She was always funny. She was always in a good mood.
Very loving, probably too much so.
November 8, 1988, Deborah DeMello's body was found in Dartmouth off Route 195 at the Reed Road exit. From the time she was a teenager, Deb struggled with addiction, but she never lost her love for her family. In the spring of 1988, Deborah DeMello, frustrated her parole hadn't come through, simply walked away from the women's jail. Months later, Deborah's body was found in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. It was a frightening time, a time when police were regularly finding bodies of murdered women along highways near New Bedford. Finally, just before Christmas, the state police confirmed Deborah was one of them. They waited to release the news so Deborah's children could enjoy one last Christmas.
Eventually, her brother had called to report her missing and was told, well, hey, we found these remains. Are there any characteristics that your sister might have that we could use to determine maybe this is or is not her? Deborah's brother told the police that she had in fact broken her wrist, and they were able to confirm that on the skeleton. Those remains were identified as her. Deborah was found off the Reed Road off of 195 in East Dartmouth, and it was really weird.
Deb was found on the opposite side of the highway ramp from where the killer dumped victim Nancy Paiva. Nancy's clothes were found with Deborah DeMello.
Nancy went missing just 3 days before Deborah did. This is a good solid bit of evidence. It's a good indication that they were probably taken or at least harmed by the same person. The next woman to be found is Dawn Mendez, and she was found November 29th. I hate this. It's like reading their names off like there's some sort of itinerary. It's just, there's so many of them. It's just one right after the other, after the other, after the other. terrible. Dawn would be the fourth victim found. She was also found off the Reed Road exit. When she was found, she actually had enough flesh on one of her hands that they were able to fingerprint her. There was a database back then, but it was very much in its infancy and only a handful of states were participating in it. But they thought that they would press their luck and give it a go anyways, and they actually got a match. But the match was for some lady out of like Worcester, Massachusetts. Completely different name, but same fingerprint and same face. It appears that she had gotten arrested at some time in the past and gave a fake name. Now, still in November, but back in Florida, Diane has gone back to the police station and totally taken back everything she said about Ken. So at this point now, Ken is released from jail in Florida. P.S. Diane was actually wanted for a warrant for violating parole she was on after serving a sentence for larceny. Back in Massachusetts, it's December 1st, and our fifth victim has now been found. Northbound on 140, also nude with the exception of a bra tied around her neck. These would be the remains of Deborah McConnell. So no bodies were found for a little while after that, but the police station was still busy because Rochelle still hadn't been found. And this court date now was happening. Like it was this month, it was coming up, and no one could find her. Rochelle, if you recall, had kind of like this weird three-way crime triangle going on. She went out on a date with a man named Roger, who she then alleged attacked her. So she went and hired Ken Pont to be her lawyer, and they went and confronted Swine together. Ken, unknown to Rochelle, brought a gun and threatened Roger with it, making Rochelle now a witness to Ken Pont's crime. So right there, that's two people, Ken and Roger, who would really benefit from Rochelle just kind of disappearing. It also, to me, seems a little suspicious that despite this upcoming court date, Ken Pont was still in Florida with no intentions of coming back. Almost kind of like he knew that the court date wasn't going to happen. Needless to say, the search for Rochelle was on, and eyes and suspicions at this point are pointing towards Kenneth Pont. Ultimately, Rochelle was found December 10th, and it was not good. She was found partially nude, severely beaten in an old gravel pit that was now used as an illegal dumping ground. Back in Florida on January 18th, Kenneth Pont gets a call from New Bedford to come back to New Bedford after being indicted on charges of that gun felony. I suspect that they were also going to try to somehow tie Rochelle's death into this. At some point in January, somebody threw a rock through Ken Pont's window, and he alleged that it was this man named Dean Luce, but he also refused to press charges against him, so that was kind of weird. Ken kind of had this habit of putting himself in the spotlight. He complained about how he was being harassed by the New Bedford law enforcement. He'd hold these press conferences and invite all these journalists and TV news stations to come, and then he would then go on and on about how he was being accused of these completely ridiculous charges and how he was being harassed. And then
now keep in mind that you and I know about Pont's shady past. We know about his past convictions and how his slate was wiped completely clean. But because he was pardoned and then reversed, this wasn't necessarily allowed to be talked about. He couldn't bring up these previous allegations and these previous arrests because they were reversed. So as far as anyone was concerned, he did not have a history or really much of a record other than his drug use. You know that phrase, the closer you are to danger, the further you are from harm? It was like he had the mentality, if he put himself in the spotlight and somehow made himself a victim, then he couldn't possibly be the criminal. And despite Ken Pont's ranting and raving, things were relatively quiet for a while until about March 28th, when the seventh body was found. And it was actually Robin Rhodes, the first girl to go missing, and she was found near Westport. Rhodes was the one who was very excited about dating a lawyer who happened to be Kenneth Pont. And just 3 days after Rhodes was found, Mary Santos was found. And Ken actually represented her in court during a divorce, and when she went missing, he also helped distribute flyers to help find her. Again, putting himself in the spotlight. In the early days of April 1989, a woman named Margaret Medeiros came into the New Bedford Police Department alleging that a man with a flat nose and a boxer build had just tried to rape her. And rumors had been circulating on the street for quite a while now about a man named Anthony DeGrazzi. He was described as being well-mannered but with violent outbursts. After hearing the description of the assailant, the police officer then went and got a photo of this man named Anthony and showed it to Margaret. When Margaret looked at the photo, she said, yes, this looks similar to him, but she did not say that this was the man. Anthony came from a broken home. It said that his mother was emotionally and physically abusive. He was described as being mild-mannered but was prone to violent outbursts, and he was known for picking up prostitutes and then being aggressive with them. Anthony was brought in and questioned before a grand jury where he denied this assault, and they actually had brought in other customers of his who also testified against him. And it's important to note and consider that the girls that Anthony ran with and the girls that Ken ran with were not from the same circle. The girls that Anthony spent time with did not know the Weld Square women and vice versa. It was two separate circles. After that, Anthony was actually scheduled to come in and take a polygraph test on April 24th. If you read online, what mostly pops up is that he didn't show. But in actuality, what happened was a combination of things. A, his lawyer legally informed the court that because they're unreliable, that he would not be showing up for this polygraph test. Also, the 8th body had been found. No one was there. They were all out at this crime scene anyways. Now, we need to know about trauma a little bit and how it affects your brain, whether it be trauma from an injury, trauma from like emotional abuse, or trauma from like drugs or alcohol, because they all change your brain and it all affects your behavior. And it's important because people are using Anthony's childhood trauma as a reason for his violent outbursts, maybe as a reason for his aggression towards women. And you're not necessarily wrong to think that. When you live with long-term trauma like that, it physically changes your brain. It causes some parts of your brain to atrophy or under fire or not fire at all, while at the same time it causes other parts of your brain to become constantly overstimulated and rapid firing without really having any control. And that can cause irrational outbursts, sporadic behavior, anger issues, which all can be relevant to Anthony. They don't necessarily make him a criminal, but they could help make someone a criminal. But what they don't really talk about at all are the effects that long-term drug use have on your brain. And this is important because, as we know, Ken, from very early adolescence, has been addicted to cocaine and heroin. And the long-term effects of that on your brain are very similar to what happened to Anthony. When you are exposed to hard drugs on the regular, it causes certain parts of your brain to atrophy or shrink and other parts of it to swell or become overstimulated. The difference with Ken is that he would also suffer the effects of the drugs itself. So basically, after all these avenues of trying to convict Anthony failed, Pina went back to the court and just said that he was now suspected of these other 17 attacks and that he needed a warrant for Anthony's arrest immediately. He was granted the warrant. As soon as Anthony heard about these warrants, he and his lawyer went and turned himself in because, as far as he's concerned, he's got nothing to hide. His bail was then set at $1 million. $1 million security bond based on a crime that had no evidence linking him to it. This is the 70s and the 80s. A 20-something-year-old guy isn't gonna have that kind of money. So he sat in jail. This ninth body that was found on the 24th was the body of Sandra Boteo. Her body was found along 195 in Marion, and she was actually curled up in the fetal position, which was a little bit different than the other body. Also around this time, Margaret was brought before a secret grand jury in regards to Anthony. She was then again in front of the jury and the judge, shown a picture of Anthony where she again said, yes, he looks similar, but she did not identify him and say, this is the guy. And I want to remind you that at this point, Anthony is behind bars, so she's perfectly safe. There's nothing stopping her from saying that it was Anthony if it, in fact, had been Anthony. While in jail, Anthony would ultimately have something like 18 trials in 13 months. During all of this, his attorney was repeatedly asking for, like, what's the evidence? Like, why are you holding him? On every single occasion, no less than 17, they were denied the evidence that was against them. So basically what I'm saying is, while Anthony was going through all these court processes, all these trials, his lawyer was asking for the evidence against him to help build their case, which he's legally entitled to. But all 17 times he was just ignored and denied. So they had no way to prepare. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't know who was going to be there, what he was even being accused of, nothing. The reason that this is significant is because without substantial proof or evidence or some sort of fact that this had happened, you're not really supposed to incarcerate a person. You're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But they arrested Anthony and held him in jail and then tried to build a case around him. Throughout researching this, I could not help but have an amount of compassion and empathy towards Anthony. They kind of took his mental state, his upbringing, his mom's neglect as a reason for him to commit all these murders, and they kind of ran with it. But I think to a point, Anthony's almost a victim. He is a product of his environment. I am no way excusing or condoning the awful things that he did. But if you look at his entire life, instead of focusing on those things, he tried to get a job. He was living in a church. He went with his lawyer and turned himself in. He sat in jail for almost a year before he even stood up for himself. It's like in between these angry outbursts, he was like a timid, almost afraid person. You turn around and you look at Ken's big picture. Ken's never been reprimanded for anything. Ken's crime spree started when he was in his early teens. Ken got pardoned and all his crimes got reversed. Ken's shit doesn't stink. Ken maybe's feeling a little bit entitled now. He gets to go to college, he gets to be a lawyer, he gets to be a sheriff, he gets to do all these drugs. He's very assertive. When fingers are finally pointed at him, he's very uncooperative. He holds all these press conferences. He keeps himself in the spotlight. He tries to make himself look like a victim. These are all very typical narcissistic personality traits. Ken holds three very important tools in his toolbox. His sense of entitlement over everything and anything that's around him, his complete lack of empathy, and his lack of guilt or remorse. And those are three very important things you need when you're going to carry a crime out against someone else. Ken doesn't care about anyone but himself, and if throwing you under the bus makes his life easier, he can and he will. Now, do you think that going to the jailhouse with his lawyer and turning himself in because of these warrants made Anthony's life easier? No. We know for a fact it didn't. He went because it was the right thing to do. And I'm not saying that Anthony is a good person, and I'm not saying that he didn't commit these other crimes in the past. He was definitely known to be violent and aggressive with the women that he picked up. But I'm saying he at least has somewhat of a moral compass, enough to at least go and turn himself in. And that That compass is the difference between Anthony and Ken Pont.
So all this stuff with Anthony has been going on in Massachusetts. Now it's June, and we're back in Florida, where Diane Doherty has now gone back to the police and re-accused Ken of all those past crimes. You remember that back in November when he first moved there, the complaint she made that he held her against her will with a gun and assaulted her? She then went back to the police station and recanted. She's now back at the police station again for a third time, re-accusing him of the same thing. When she was asked why she was being so flip-floppy, it was a combination of her seeing the things that he was actually capable of and her having daughters. She was afraid of what he would do to her or them if she were to proceed with the charges. So she went back to have him released for fear of his retaliation. So in June of 1990, Kenneth Pont was re-arrested. So both Ken and Anthony are in jail now, one in Massachusetts and one in Florida. And finally, for Anthony, after being in jail for over a year, having all these trials, being refused this evidence that he's legally entitled to, he finally fired his lawyer and hired a new one from Boston. After being hired, his new lawyer immediately saw the injustices that were being held over Anthony and filed a motion of contempt against the DA for failure to release evidence, and he was immediately released because they were holding him illegally and they knew it. Anthony would not stay out of jail for very long, though. Shortly after being released, he was heard voicing his grievances against the jail and his long, drawn-out, unlawful stay. Pina construed that as a threat and immediately re-arrested him. Thankfully, though, this time Anthony had a decent lawyer, so his bond was set at a reasonable amount and he was quickly able to bail out of jail. At this time that Anthony was trying to get work as a stonemason and living in a church. On July 13th, 1990, Ken was also released from jail on his charge on his own recognizance, which means that he was released without bail, but kind of like under certain stipulations. There were strings attached. According to the assistant state attorney at the time, they were just ill-prepared for the preliminary hearing, and so they were just kind of forced to release him. Those were the charges placed on him in Florida from Diane. The local law enforcement there was having a super hard time with this case because Diane was so unpredictable and unreliable. In January, she actually signed an affidavit and gave it to Pont's lawyer, claiming that she didn't know him and she'd never met him. Let me remind you that she was there at least a year ago complaining of the same assault. She's at least known him for a year. How could that even be taken seriously? So she was basically no use to the sheriff department or the court process here. So she was sent back because she had those warrants out for her arrest for violating parole. So they just went ahead and sent her back for that. Just 4 days after Pont was released from jail, Anthony's body was found at his ex-girlfriend's house under a picnic table, deceased. Gets a little squiffy here because law enforcement will tell you that this was a suicide and an obvious admission of guilt. There was a pill bottle beside him. Medical examiners deemed this as a homicide. It's August now, and on the 17th, Pont is arraigned in court again for the beating and murder of Rochelle. It was there that he claimed that he was absolutely not guilty, and then proceeded to pay a $50,000 bail. During all of this, there was like a regime change, and now there's a new district attorney. The new DA then dropped the charges against Pont for a lack of evidence. And during the following year, all of his remaining drug and assault charges were also dropped. Sound familiar? One of the biggest reasons that everything was dropped is because everyone involved was dead. Everyone in that circle was dead except for pawns. Basically, without physical evidence and better DNA science at the time, this case was impossible to solve. We need to talk about the MMO here for each of these people. Let's break it down. Now, what is the MMO? Is like the toolkit. It's the basic necessities that you need to carry out a crime, or I guess really anything successfully. It's the means, it's the motive, and it's the opportunity. Now, the means would be, for example, like, do you have a weapon picked out? Do you have a place that you can carry this crime out? Do you have a way to coerce the person to come with you? Do you have a plan? What is your plan? The motives would be, I'm sure that's a term we're all familiar with, the reason for you wanting to do this. Is there a life insurance policy? Was there a child custody battle? Was somebody a witness to something that maybe they shouldn't have seen? Something like that. And the opportunity would be, along with the means, do you have the ability to carry this out, and how? For both of these men, their means and their opportunity could just simply be they are known for picking up prostitutes and having them in their cars. That's a place to do it, and also an opportunity. Let's break it down and talk about just Anthony's MMO for a moment. Means. The only thing that I can really think of is he does have his car. His means would be he picks him up in his car, he carries the crime out in his car, and then he dumps the body. Now, when we talk about a motive, it depends on kind of how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. He doesn't really have a motive other than his mental trauma, assuming it's not coupled with an underlying disability, a bipolar or something. His childhood could lead him to violent or agitated outbursts. But as far as I know, these women never did anything to him. As far as his opportunity, known for having prostitutes in his car, his opportunity would be that they're in his car with him. Now, with that being said, there was a rumor going around and a description of this man that is similar to Anthony's, that he was violent, so women were avoiding going into cars with men who met this description. And that kind of takes away his means and his opportunity right there. Aside from the fact that Anthony's circle and Ken's circle didn't really know each other, so Anthony didn't really interact with these Weld Square women that were going missing anyways. Let's talk about Ken's MMO, because it's never ending. Means, his tools could be he has a place, it's his house or his car, because these women are running drugs to him. Wouldn't necessarily need a plan if he's able to carry it out in his house, because he'd have the privacy of his house to kind of like collect his thoughts after if something spontaneous or accidental were to happen there. His motives are never ending again. These women bring him his drugs, so they're aware of his illegal drug activity, coupled with the fact that he's a sheriff and a lawyer. It would be terrible if that information got out. There was accusations of porn or snuff films being made in his house. Michelle was a witness to him committing a crime against that man, Roger Swine. And along with the means, as far as opportunity, he had personal relationships with these women, whether he was friends with them, whether he represented them in court, whether he intimately dated them. These women, to a point, trusted him. They were not afraid to get in a car with him. There were certain vulnerabilities involved on both parts. These women saw a lot of things that maybe they weren't supposed to see. All these boxes tick for Ken. So when considering Ken, if we take a look at the way his brain is probably functioning just from the trauma of the drugs, which if you're gonna do it to Anthony, you have to do it to Ken. We consider let's just call it brain damage for lack of a better term. If we consider the brain damage he has from his drug use, coupled with the effects of the drug itself, we add to that the fact that he has these kind of spotlight jobs. He's a sheriff and he's a lawyer, along with the fact that these women have seen him commit crimes, whether it's Rochelle and the gun or these women just bringing the drugs to him.
That's gonna create a lot of stress and paranoia and worry. It'd be really easy to imagine Ken just breaking and just spontaneously doing something. If you take a step back and look at these Weld Square murders, you start to realize that it wasn't a bunch of random killings. These women knew each other. It wasn't just a bunch of murders and all the women happened to be prostitutes or happened to be drug addicts or happened to frequent the same bar. These girls knew each other. Some of them were friends. Some of them lived together. Almost half of them had direct personal ties with Pont, whether it be them working for him in his office or him representing them in court. A handful of them actually dated him. They all ran drugs to him. This was a circle of friends that was taken out or silenced to accomplish something. If you look at Anthony, he didn't really have ties with any of these women. The only way he fit into this was him and Pont just had a similar reputation as far as picking up prostitutes. Sorry, not sorry about the little rant there. Criminal and characteristic profiling is important and it needed to be done. But we're back on track now, and July 13th, 1990, Pont was released from jail, and then a few days after that, Anthony was found deceased. The last two women have never been found, and this kind of ends the traditional timeline for the New Bedford murders. I kept the timeline going right up until Pont's death, and it stays just as insane. In March 1991, like we talked about, his charges were dropped for lack of physical evidence. When these crimes were committed, there was very little DNA science available, like the fingerprinting was cutting edge back then. So as far as DNA, you couldn't just take a swab. You needed like buckets and buckets of blood. And because these bodies had been out in the elements for so long, there just wasn't any DNA. There wasn't really any physical evidence to recover. All those charges were dropped for the lack of physical evidence. On July 12th, 1991, another woman has gone missing, and her name was Nadine Mendoza. Nadine was last seen at a place called Jake's Saloon, which was like less than a mile away from Whispers Pub, and she was last spotted giving a man who needed a ride back to New Bedford. She was also known to be an active drug user. She was officially reported missing July 15th. The man she was seen leaving with has been interviewed, but his name has never been publicly given. Her car was later found with blood on a pillow, her blood. I guess she was really short and just like had to sit on the pillow to see and drive and stuff. So her car was found with blood on that pillow. The window was smashed out, but also she had a ring from her grandmother, and that was found in the trunk. And this kind of reminds me or makes me think of the way that Sheila was found, how she was found in her car in her trunk. In 1997, Pont was actually disbarred when he got caught using like $12,000 of a client's inheritance money for personal use. Speaking of personal use, it's been well documented through police logs that Ken was an active user of cocaine and heroin all throughout this time. Between like 97 and 98, he had multiple arrests just based on the drug charges alone. Despite all this, he continued to use the previous harassment he received from the New Bedford murders as a reason for his downfall. The list just goes on and on. In 2004, he was charged with animal abuse and neglect, specifically towards his pet cats. According to an article in South Coast Today in 2007, he threatened to kill his sister and his mother. In May of 2009, after receiving a hot tip, the patio of Ken's house was dug up, but they didn't find anything at that time. Although in a previous search, they found guns, drug paraphernalia, thousands and thousands of videos of porn,
although none of the victims, although to be fair, it's been a million years, so he would have had plenty of time and opportunity to get rid of those. A ton of incriminating evidence was found in his house. 2009, he was caught shoplifting from the local New Bedford supermarket, a bunch of cans of fish and some cheese. Sounds like he had a super hot date later. Keeping in mind that throughout all of this, he is still addicted to heroin and cocaine. And finally, in January of 2010, he was found deceased on a stack of mattresses in his own home. It was pretty deplorable. The conditions were real bad. He was just surrounded by trash and drug paraphernalia. All his furniture was upturned and in disarray, and it was assumed that he passed away of an overdose. And this concludes my timeline for the New Bedford murders. This was absolutely fascinating to research. It was really hard to pull myself away from it. It's a never-ending stream of coincidences. Sheila Pena herself had a whole other crazy timeline all on her own. Let me know if you want me to do a video just based on the shady doings of Sheila. I had a lot of fun researching this. I really like profiling people, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. If you have any suggestions on things you'd like me to do next, leave them in the comments. And as always, please like, share, subscribe. It really helps our channels to grow, and stay safe out there. Bye.